In the scorching heat of Camp Valor, a quiet seamstress was about to shatter every assumption about who belonged on the front lines. What started as a routine weapons drill took a shocking turn when she came face to face with a sabotaged rifle that could kill Marines. Lena Ortega wasn't your typical civilian contractor. For 7 years, she had spent her life serving in combat zones, first as an army medic, then as a wheeled vehicle mechanic, known for her uncanny ability to see patterns others missed and fix what seemed irreparably broken. When she encountered a deliberately damaged M16 with tampered components, she had no idea she was walking into a deadly conspiracy that reached far beyond Camp Valor. Lena's decision to investigate that would lead to uncovering a network of betrayal threatening every Marine base in the theater. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The desert heat pressed against Camp Valor like a hostile force, turning the morning air thick and unforgiving. Inside the climate-controlled repair bay tucked beneath Hangar C, Lena Ortega worked with the steady rhythm of someone who had found peace in precision. Her fingers moved across the olive-drab fabric of a torn field jacket, needle pulling thread in perfect, measured strokes that would outlast any machine stitch. The repair bay was her kingdom, a forgotten corner where broken things came to be made whole again. Rolls of canvas and nylon lined the metal shelving, alongside spools of thread in every shade of military regulation. The scent of fabric softener mixed with the metallic tang of the base's recycled air, creating a peculiar comfort that Lena had grown to love over the past 18 months. She paused, holding the jacket up to the fluorescent light. The tier had been clean, too clean. In her 3 years of civilian service and 4 years of active duty before that, she'd seen every kind of damage fabric could take. Combat tiers were jagged, desperate things. Accidents left frayed edges and pulled threads. This cut was surgical, deliberate. The radio crackled from the corner desk. All units, weapons check complete. Stand down from drill positions. Lena's hands stilled on the fabric. She'd heard the commotion earlier, raised voices from the direction of the armory, the sharp bark of Gunnery Sergeant Dawson's commands cutting through the usual bass noise. Weapons checks were routine, but something had gone wrong today. The bay door rattled as someone knocked. "Ms. Ortega? You in there?" She recognized the voice, Private First Class Malik Reyes, barely 22 and still eager enough to say ma'am to the coffee cart lady. Lena set down her work and opened the door to find him holding a disassembled M16, its components scattered across a canvas tarp. "Sergeant says you might be able to look at this," Malik said, his dark eyes uncertain. "The armory's backed up, and this pin's bent to hell." Lena glanced at the rifle parts, then back at Malik's face. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the morning hour. "What happened during the drill?" "Misfire scare," he said quietly, glancing over his shoulder. "Thompson's rifle jammed during assembly. When Dawson took it apart, half the pins were loose. He's got the whole squad running diagnostics now." She gestured for him to come inside, watching as he carefully laid the tarp on her workbench. The rifle components gleamed under the lights, but something was off. The trigger guard showed microscopic scratches around the pin housing, the kind of wear that came from repeated disassembly with the wrong tools. "This wasn't field damage," Lena said, running her finger along the bent firing pin. "Someone's been taking this apart." Malik frowned. That's not standard maintenance, is it?" "No." Lena's hands moved automatically, muscle memory from a different life taking over. She selected the firing pin from the scattered parts, examining it under her desk lamp. "Hand me that punch set." "You know how to—" "I wasn't always a seamstress, Malik." She worked in silence, straightening the pin with careful pressure, checking the spring tension, aligning the components with practiced ease. Her fingers moved faster now, finding the rhythm she'd learned in another desert, in another life. Bolt carrier group, charging handle, trigger assembly, each piece sliding into place with the satisfying precision of a puzzle solved. Malik watched, his mouth slightly open. "Jesus, ma'am, how long did that take you?" Lena glanced at the wall clock. 2 minutes, 40 seconds. "Thompson's best time is 4:15. She handed him the reassembled rifle, checking the action one final time. The firing pin was deliberately bent. This wasn't maintenance or normal wear. "You're saying someone—" I'm saying someone wanted this rifle to malfunction. Lena met his eyes. And if it happened to this one, it's probably happened to others. Malik hefted the rifle, testing the weight and balance. Should I report this? To who? Dawson thinks civilians should stick to coffee and laundry. McCall follows protocol like it's gospel. She turned back to her sewing machine, but her mind was racing. Just keep your eyes open, okay? If you see anything else strange. After Malik left, Lena stood alone in her repair bay, staring at the torn jacket in her hands. The cut was too clean, too precise. Just like the damage to that firing pin. Just like the scratches on metal that told stories of deliberate interference. She walked to her filing cabinet and pulled out the maintenance log she kept for all uniform repairs. Each entry noted the type of damage, the unit it came from, the Marine who brought it in. Flipping through the pages, a pattern began to emerge. Too many accidental tears in load-bearing gear. Too many pouches with cut straps that had been hastily resewn, but not by her. Someone was playing games with equipment that kept Marines alive. And in 18 months of invisible service, Lena had become very good at seeing things others missed. The base settled into its evening rhythm as Lena made her way toward the armory complex. The desert air had cooled to merely oppressive, and the distant mountains wavered like mirages in the dying light. She carried a small notebook and a thermos of coffee, props to explain her presence if anyone asked. She found Malik in the ammunition storage bay, methodically checking serial numbers against inventory sheets. His young face showed the kind of focused determination that reminded her why she'd stayed in this life, even after everything that had driven her from active duty. "Evening rounds?" she asked quietly. He looked up, relief flickering across his features. "Ms. Ortega, I was hoping you'd come by." He gestured to the clipboard in his hands. "I've been thinking about what you said. About keeping my eyes open. And I pulled the maintenance logs for the last 3 months. Every weapon that's come through here for repair or replacement." He handed her a stack of photocopied pages. "Look at the pattern." Lena accepted the papers, scanning the columns of data. Weapon serial numbers, reported malfunctions, repair codes. At first glance, it looked like standard wear and tear, the kind of breakdown that happened when equipment met the harsh realities of desert deployment. But Malik had highlighted certain entries in yellow. These rifles all came from 3rd Platoon, 11 weapons in 6 weeks, all with different problems. Bent pins, loose trigger groups, cracked stocks. 3rd Platoon sees heavy patrol rotation, Lena said, but her mind was already working. "Yeah, but look at this," he pointed to a column she'd initially overlooked. "The serial numbers on the replacement parts, they don't match the original components." Lena felt something cold settle in her stomach. In the military, serial numbers were everything. The chain of accountability that tracked every piece of equipment from manufacture to disposal. Mismatched serials meant either sloppy paperwork or deliberate obfuscation. "Who processes the part requisitions?" she asked. "Sergeant Coates handles all the logistics coordination. He's the one who signs off on replacement components." Thomas Coates. Lena had met him exactly twice, once during her initial orientation, and once when he'd complimented her work on a dress uniform alteration. Smooth, professional, the kind of senior NCO who made things happen without drama. "Have you brought this to anyone's attention?" Malik shook his head. "I'm a PFC with 6 months in country. They'd tell me to focus on my own job and stop looking for conspiracies." "They might be right," Lena said carefully. "But mismatched serials aren't conspiracy theories. They're evidence." She photographed the relevant pages with her phone, making sure the serial number discrepancies were clearly visible. "Can you get me the actual weapons?" "The ones with replacement parts?" "Some of them. The others are back in rotation." Malik hesitated. "Ms. Ortega, if someone's really messing with our gear." "Then Marines die." The words came out harder than she'd intended, carrying echoes of another base, another investigation that had come too late. "And we can't let that happen." They worked together for the next hour, pulling weapons from storage and comparing serial numbers to the documentation. Each discrepancy built a clearer picture. Someone with access to both weapons and paperwork was systematically degrading the unit's combat readiness. "This is enough to take to Major Ramirez," Lena said finally. "Is it? I mean, we're talking about Sergeant Coates. He's been here longer than anyone. Has commendations, combat experience." "So did Sergeant Morrison at FOB Blackwater," Lena said quietly. right up until they found him selling ammunition to insurgents. Malik's eyes widened. You were at Blackwater? Different life. She closed the notebook. Decision made. But same lesson. Trust the evidence, not the rank. As they prepared to leave, a shadow fell across the bay entrance. Sergeant Coates stepped into the light, his expression pleasant, but his eyes sharp. Working late tonight, Reyes? Just finishing inventory, Sergeant. Coates' gaze shifted to Lena. Ms. Ortega don't usually see you in the armory. Consulting on a repair issue, she replied evenly. Some equipment came through with unusual wear patterns. Unusual how? The question was casual, but something in his tone made Lena's instincts sharpen. Components that don't match their maintenance history. Probably just paperwork errors. Probably, Coates smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Well, I'm sure you'll get it sorted. Just remember, weapons maintenance is a specialized field. Easy for civilians to misinterpret what they're seeing. Of course. Good night, then. Don't work too late, Reyes. Tomorrow's another busy day. After he left, Malik and Lena stood in silence for a long moment. That felt like a warning, Malik said finally. It was. Lena shouldered her bag, mind already racing ahead to tomorrow's challenges. Which means we're on the right track. The morning sun turned the parade ground into a furnace of dust and determination. Gunnery Sergeant Reed Dawson's voice carried across the assembled Marines like controlled thunder, each word precisely calibrated to inspire both fear and excellence. Weapon readiness is life readiness, he barked. Your rifle is your lifeline, your last resort, your best friend. If you can't put it together in your sleep, you might as well be carrying a club. Lena watched from the shadows of the maintenance shed, ostensibly there to deliver repaired gear but really drawn by curiosity. Beside her, Malik stood at attention with the rest of 3rd Platoon, his face a mask of concentration. Thompson, front and center. Private Thompson jogged forward, his movements sharp despite the obvious nerves. He was Dawson's current champion, the Marine who held the base record for M16 assembly at 3 minutes, 58 seconds. Strip and assemble, Dawson commanded, placing a disassembled rifle on the makeshift table. Show these boots how it's done. Thompson's hands moved with practiced efficiency. Bolt carrier group, charging handle, trigger assembly, each component sliding into place with mechanical precision. The watching Marines counted silently, measuring their own skills against his performance. Time, Dawson called. 4 minutes, 12 seconds. Not your best, Thompson, but adequate. A murmur ran through the assembled Marines. 4:12 was still faster than most of them could manage, but it was also 20 seconds slower than Thompson's record. The pin housing was sticky, Thompson said, wiping sweat from his forehead. Felt like the spring tension was off. Lena stepped forward before she could stop herself. The firing pin's been over-torqued, she said, her voice carrying clearly in the morning air. Someone's been using the wrong gauge wrench. The parade ground fell silent. 40 pairs of eyes turned toward her, ranging from curious to hostile. Dawson's expression could have melted steel. Excuse me, ma'am, he said, the courtesy dripping with disdain, but this is a Marine training exercise. I don't recall requesting civilian consultation. You didn't, Lena replied, stepping fully into the circle, but that rifle's been deliberately damaged. The pin housing shows tool marks from improper disassembly. And you know this how? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Around her, Marines shifted uncomfortably. Some were grinning, anticipating the entertainment of watching a civilian get dressed down by Dawson. Others looked genuinely curious about her answer. Because I've seen it before, Lena said simply. And because I can probably assemble that rifle faster than anyone here. The silence stretched taut as a tripwire. Then someone in the back ranks laughed, a short, sharp sound that was picked up by others. Dawson's face darkened. Is that right? He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell coffee and determination on his breath. You think you can outperform my Marines? I think your Marines deserve equipment that hasn't been sabotaged. Sabotaged? The word came out like profanity. Lady, you're talking about United States Marine Corps equipment. These rifles are maintained to the highest. Prove me wrong, Lena interrupted. Give me a clean rifle and a stopwatch. For a moment, she thought Dawson might order her off the parade ground. His jaw worked silently, pride warring with curiosity, Finally, he turned to his platoon. "Rodriguez, bring your weapon, now!" Private Rodriguez double-timed forward, presenting his M16 with parade ground precision. Dawson inspected it briefly, then began disassembly with swift, angry movements. Components scattered across the table in organized chaos. "One chance," he said, stepping back. "Make me look foolish, and I'll have you banned from every training area on this base." "Understood." Lena approached the table, aware of every eye tracking her movement. She let her hands hover over the components for a moment, not hesitating but remembering. 4 years of active duty. Countless hours in armories from Quantico to Kandahar. The muscle memory of someone who had once trusted her life to these same mechanisms. Her hands moved. Bolt carrier group, bolt firing pin. The components flowed together like water finding its level. Lower receiver, trigger group, safety selector. Each piece found its place with the inevitability of gravity, guided by fingers that remembered even when the mind tried to forget. The rifle took shape beneath her hands, metal and polymer becoming something greater than the sum of its parts. She worked in complete silence, aware of the watching Marines but focused entirely on the familiar puzzle of precision engineering. "Time!" Malik's voice cut through her concentration. She looked up to find Dawson staring at his stopwatch, his expression unreadable. 2 minutes, 38 seconds, he said quietly. The parade ground erupted. Marines shouted, whistled, clapped. Someone yelled, "Holy shit, Sarge," before catching himself and falling silent. Lena stepped back from the table, her heart hammering. She'd broken the base record by more than a minute. But more importantly, she'd revealed herself. The quiet seamstress was gone, replaced by someone these Marines would remember. "Where did you learn to do that?" Dawson asked, his voice stripped of its earlier hostility. "Paris Island," Lena said simply. "Same place you did." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "Your former corps." "Former army. But a rifle's a rifle, Sergeant, and these rifles are being sabotaged." Dawson looked down at the assembled weapon, then back at her face. Something had shifted in his expression, not quite respect, but recognition. "Walk with me," he said quietly. As they moved away from the dispersing Marines, Lena caught Malik's eye. He nodded slightly, a promise that he'd keep watching, keep gathering evidence. Around them, the base continued its daily rhythm, but she could feel the change in the air. The seamstress had stepped into the light. Now came the hard part, proving that the shadows held enemies. The afternoon heat had settled over Camp Valor like a heavy blanket when Sergeant Thomas Coates appeared in Lena's repair bay. She looked up from her sewing machine to find him filling the doorway, his smile warm and his eyes cold as winter steel. "Ms. Ortega," he said, stepping inside uninvited. "Heard you caused quite a stir at this morning's drill." Lena kept her hands steady on the fabric she was hemming, though every instinct screamed danger. "Just helped with a mechanical issue." "Mechanical issue," Coates chuckled, moving deeper into her workspace. His fingers trailed along her shelving, touching spools of thread with casual familiarity. 2 minutes, 38 seconds. That's impressive for someone who repairs uniforms. "I used to do other things." "Army, wasn't it, before you found your calling in domestic services?" The words carried just enough emphasis to sting. "Must be quite an adjustment, from soldier to seamstress." Lena finally looked up, meeting his gaze directly. "I like the work. It's honest." "Honest work." "I appreciate that." Coates picked up a spool of olive drab thread, examining it in the fluorescent light. "Though sometimes honest work can lead to honest mistakes, especially when people start seeing patterns that aren't really there." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Lena set down her sewing, giving him her full attention. "What kind of patterns?" "Oh, equipment failures, maintenance issues. The kind of thing that might look suspicious to someone who doesn't understand the full picture." He replaced the thread spool with precise care. "For instance, someone might notice that certain weapons need more frequent repair, but they might not know that 3rd Platoon runs the hardest patrol rotations. More use, more wear." "That would explain general degradation," Lena said carefully, but not specific component failures. Exactly my point. Coates smiled again, but there was no warmth in it. It takes experience to interpret maintenance data correctly. The kind of experience that comes from years in logistics, not months behind a sewing machine. Quote. He moved closer, and Lena caught the scent of aftershave mixed with something else, gun oil and metal shavings. I'd hate to see a valued civilian contractor get herself into trouble by making accusations she can't support. The Marine Corps takes equipment security very seriously. False reports can have serious consequences. And real sabotage would be dealt with appropriately by the proper authorities, following proper channels. Each word was carefully measured, not by seamstresses playing detective. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire. Finally, Coates stepped back, his professional mask sliding back into place. Well, I should let you get back to your honest work. Just remember, sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one who makes you see threats where none exist. He paused at the doorway. Stay safe, Ms. Ortega. Camp Valor can be a dangerous place for people who don't know their role. After he left, Lena sat motionless for several minutes, her heart hammering against her ribs. The message had been crystal clear: back off, or face consequences. But Coates had made one crucial mistake. He'd confirmed that someone was watching her investigation. Her phone buzzed. A text from Malik. Found something. Storage Bay 7, midnight. She deleted the message and returned to her sewing, but her mind was racing. If Coates was the saboteur, he now knew they were onto him. That made tonight's meeting either their best chance for evidence or a potential trap. The storage bay felt like a tomb at midnight. Lena found Malek crouched behind a stack of supply crates, his face illuminated by the glow of a tablet computer. He looked up as she approached, relief and excitement warring in his expression. I was starting to think you wouldn't come, he whispered. Coates paid me a visit this afternoon, made it clear that my investigation isn't welcome. Then we're definitely onto something, Malik gestured to his tablet. Look at this. The screen showed a digital inventory manifest, rows of equipment codes, serial numbers, and location assignments. At first glance, it appeared to be standard logistics data, but Malik had highlighted certain entries in red. These are crates marked as, quote, to field units, he explained. But when I physically checked them tonight, they're still here, unopened. Lena studied the data more carefully. Phantom requisitions. Someone's creating false paper trails. Gets better. Or worse, depending on how you look at it. Malik swiped to a different screen. Cross-reference the issued gear with the weapons that came in for repair. Perfect match. The pattern was undeniable now. Equipment was being marked as distributed to units, but the actual items remained in storage. Meanwhile, sabotaged weapons were being sent out to Marines who thought they were carrying reliable gear. How long has this been going on? Lena asked. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Based on the manifests? At least 6 months. Maybe longer. Malik's voice carried a tremor of anger. Jesus, Ms. Ortega. How many Marines went on patrol with compromised weapons? Too many. She photographed the tablet screen with her phone, but we still need to prove who's doing it. I've got an idea about that too. Malik led her deeper into the storage area, weaving between towering stacks of crates and equipment pallets. Coates processes all the logistics orders through his office terminal, if we could get access to his computer. That's breaking and entering, and probably treason. So is sabotaging military equipment. He stopped at a maintenance access panel mounted on the wall. Besides, we wouldn't be breaking in. I've got legitimate access to the logistics network for inventory updates. Lena studied the panel, recognizing the standard military network interface. You're talking about accessing his personal files. I'm talking about finding evidence before more Marines get killed. Malik's young face was hard with determination. My cousin died in Fallujah when his rifle jammed during a firefight. If someone's doing that deliberately, she understood. The need for justice, for accountability, could drive good people to dangerous choices. But she also knew the cost of acting without proper authority. We take this to Major Ramirez first, she decided. Show her what we've found. Let her make the call. And if she doesn't believe us? If she thinks we're just a paranoid seamstress and a green PFC? Then we go to the next level. But we do this right, Malik. The evidence has to be clean, or it won't matter. As they prepared to leave, The storage bay's main lights suddenly blazed to life. Both of them froze, caught in the open between the crates like deer in headlights. "Well, well," came a familiar voice. "What do we have here?" Quote, Gunnery Sergeant Dawson emerged from behind a equipment pallet, his expression grim but not hostile. Behind him walked Lieutenant McCall, looking nervous and official. "Sergeant," Lena said carefully, "we can explain." "I'm sure you can." Dawson's gaze took in the tablet. The open inventory screens. Their guilty postures. "The question is whether I want to hear it." "Sir," Malik began, but Dawson cut him off with a raised hand. "Reyes, you're supposed to be in your rack. And Ms. Ortega, civilians aren't authorized in storage areas after 2,100 hours. Lieutenant McCall stepped forward, consulting his clipboard with bureaucratic precision. "I'm afraid I'll have to write this up. Unauthorized access to restricted areas, possible security violation." "Lieutenant," Dawson interrupted, "why don't you go file your paperwork? I'll handle the personnel issue." McCall looked uncertain but nodded. "Very well, but this needs to be documented properly." After the lieutenant left, Dawson studied them both for a long moment. "So," he said finally, "want to tell me what's really going on here?" The base commander's office felt smaller than it should have, cramped by tension and the weight of bureaucratic protocol. Lieutenant McCall sat behind his temporary desk, Lena's evidence folder closed, and pushed to one side like a distasteful meal. His expression carried the particular blend of condescension and irritation that came with having his routine disrupted by inconvenient truths. "Ms. Ortega," he said, not looking up from his computer screen, "I've reviewed your concerns. While I appreciate civilian vigilance, I'm afraid your conclusions are based on incomplete information." Lena sat rigidly in the uncomfortable metal chair, Malik beside her in dress uniform that couldn't quite hide his nervous energy. Behind them, Gunnery Sergeant Dawson stood at parade rest, his presence both reassuring and ominous. "Sir," she said carefully, The evidence shows maintenance issues that are well within normal parameters," McCall interrupted. "Sergeant Coates has already provided context for the discrepancies you've identified. 3rd Platoon's equipment sees heavy use. Higher failure rates are expected." "What about the phantom requisitions?" Malik asked. "Equipment marked as issued but still in storage." McCall finally looked up, his pale eyes settling on Malik with visible displeasure. "Private, you've been counseled before about exceeding your authority. Inventory discrepancies are handled through proper logistics channels, not midnight reconnaissance missions." "With respect, sir," Dawson interjected, "Reyes brought legitimate concerns to his chain of command. I've verified his findings personally." "Which is appreciated, Gunny, but it doesn't change the fact that civilian contractors and junior enlisted personnel aren't qualified to interpret complex logistics data." McCall leaned back in his chair, the gesture meant to convey authority but achieving only pompous dismissal. "Ms. Ortega, your technical skills are noted and appreciated, but your role here is uniform maintenance, not counterintelligence." The words hit like a physical blow. Lena felt heat rise in her cheeks, but kept her voice level. "Sir, if these weapons fail in combat." "They won't, because they're being properly maintained by qualified personnel following established procedures." McCall opened a different folder on his desk. "Speaking of procedures, I'm placing you on administrative review pending a full evaluation of your conduct." "Administrative review?" Dawson stepped forward, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. "Sir, what exactly is Ms. Ortega being accused of?" "Overstepping her civilian authority, accessing restricted areas without authorization, interfering with military operations." McCall's tone suggested he was reading from a prepared list. "She'll remain on limited duty pending the outcome of the review." "And Reyes?" "Will be transferred to KP duty for the next 2 weeks. Perhaps kitchen work will remind him to focus on his actual responsibilities." Malik's face flushed red, but he remained silent. Lena could feel his frustration radiating like heat from a forge. 2 weeks of punishment duty for trying to protect his fellow Marines. "This is a mistake, sir," Dawson said. "These irregularities need investigation." "They've been investigated, Gunny, by qualified personnel. The matter is closed." McCall returned his attention to his computer screen. "Unless there's something else?" The dismissal was clear. As they filed out of the office, Lena caught Dawson's eye. The sergeant's expression promised that this conversation wasn't over, but she also saw the frustration of a man caught between duty and justice. In the corridor outside, Malik finally exploded. "This is bullshit, Sergeant. Complete bullshit." Quote, "Watch your language, Reyes," Dawson said, but without real heat, "and keep your voice down." "They're going to get people killed," Malik continued, his voice dropping to an angry whisper, "and we're just supposed to shut up and follow orders?" "You're supposed to be Marines," Dawson replied, "which means you adapt and overcome." Lena understood the subtext. Dawson couldn't openly defy McCall's orders, but he wasn't abandoning their investigation either. The message was clear: find another way. "Sergeant," she said quietly, "when you ran your own checks on the equipment, I found exactly what you said I'd find." His voice was carefully neutral. "Irregularities that deserve explanation. And if those explanations don't come through official channels?" Dawson was quiet for a long moment, weighing duty against conscience. "Then maybe someone needs to take the matter to a higher authority, someone with the rank to demand answers. Major Ramirez." The Major's got her own pressures: external threats, resource limitations, political considerations. He looked directly at Lena. "But she's also got a reputation for protecting her Marines, even from threats they can't see coming." As they walked through the base in the gathering dusk, Lena felt the weight of isolation settling over her like a shroud. McCall had effectively silenced her, removed her from any position to investigate further. But he'd also confirmed her worst suspicions. The cover-up was official now, which meant the sabotage went deeper than one rogue sergeant. "What's our next move?" Malik asked. "You don't have a next move," Lena told him. "You report to KP duty and keep your head down." "Like hell." "Like a smart Marine who wants to live long enough to help his fellow jarheads." She stopped walking, forcing them to face her. "This isn't over, but it's not your fight anymore. They've made sure of that." "Then whose fight is it?" Lena looked toward the command building, where lights still burned in the windows of senior officers working late into the night. Major Ramirez was up there somewhere, dealing with the 100 small crises that kept a forward base operational. Soon, she'd be dealing with one more. "Mine," Lena said simply. "It's my fight now." Major Elena Ramirez looked every inch the combat commander, even at 0300 hours, with coffee stains on her desert utilities and exhaustion lining her dark eyes. Her office occupied a corner of the command building, its walls covered with operational maps, unit rosters, and the accumulated detritus of leading Marines in a hostile environment. Lena sat across from her, acutely aware that this meeting could end her time at Camp Valor, or worse. Ramirez had agreed to see her only after Dawson's carefully worded recommendation, and even then with obvious reluctance. "Ms. Ortega," the Major said, her voice carrying the precise diction of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Gunny Dawson says you have concerns about equipment security. He also mentions that Lieutenant McCall has placed you on administrative review." "Yes, ma'am. I believe those two facts are related." Ramirez raised an eyebrow. "Explain." For the next 20 minutes, Lena laid out everything they'd discovered. The tampered weapons, the mismatched serial numbers, the phantom requisitions that created false paper trails. She showed photographs, shared Malik's inventory data, and detailed the pattern of sabotage that painted a clear picture of systematic equipment degradation. "These are serious allegations," Ramirez said when Lena finished. "You're essentially accusing a senior NCO of treason. I'm presenting evidence and asking for a proper investigation by someone who's qualified to conduct one, not a civilian contractor operating outside her authority." But there was no hostility in the Major's voice, only careful consideration. "What makes you think Sergeant Coates is involved?" Lena described the visit to her repair bay, the subtle threats disguised as friendly advice. "He knew about my investigation before I'd reported it through any official channels. That suggests either surveillance or inside information. Or he heard about your weapons demonstration from any of the 40 Marines who witnessed it." Ramirez leaned back in her chair. "Ms. Ortega, I appreciate your dedication. But correlation isn't causation. Equipment failures happen. Inventory discrepancies occur. Senior NCOs protect their areas of responsibility. Ma'am, with respect, how many equipment failures is too many? How many Marines have to die before we investigate properly?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire. Ramirez studied Lena's face, looking for something. Sincerity, competence, or perhaps just the courage to speak truth to power. "Tell me about your military background," she said finally. 4 years Army, 68W combat medic, then 91B wheeled vehicle mechanic, 2 deployments to Afghanistan. Lena kept her voice steady, professional. Honorable discharge in 2018. "Why did you leave?" The question she'd been dreading. "Personal reasons, ma'am." "Personal reasons that brought you back to military service as a civilian." Lena was quiet for a long moment, weighing how much truth this conversation could bear. "My brother was KIA in a convoy ambush outside Kandahar. Poor maintenance on the lead vehicle caused an engine failure at the worst possible moment. I spent 2 years fighting the bureaucracy for accountability. Eventually, I realized I could do more good from the inside." Understanding flickered in Ramirez's eyes. "And now you think you found another maintenance problem that could cost lives?" "I think I've found evidence of deliberate sabotage. Whether anyone believes me is a different question." There was a knock at the door. Dawson entered, his expression grim. "Ma'am, you asked me to verify Miss Ortega's findings independently." "And?" "She's right. I pulled weapons from storage using the serial number she provided. Found tampering on 6 different rifles, all showing signs of deliberate damage." He placed a manila folder on her desk. "I also found something else." Ramirez opened the folder, revealing photographs of weapon components alongside detailed notes in Dawson's precise handwriting. "What am I looking at, Gunny?" "Tool marks. Whoever's doing this is using specialized equipment, military-grade precision tools, not standard issue." Dawson pointed to a close-up photograph. "These scratches were made by a torque wrench calibrated to specific tolerances. That narrows our suspect pool considerably." "How considerably?" "On this base, maybe a dozen people have access to that level of equipment, all senior NCOs or specialized technicians." Ramirez studied the photographs for several minutes, her command face revealing nothing. Finally, she looked up at Lena. "If you're right about this, if someone really is sabotaging our weapons, what would you recommend?" "A controlled investigation. Mark specific weapons with hidden tracers, monitor who has access, and wait for our saboteur to make a mistake. That could take weeks, and it assumes he doesn't already suspect we're watching." "Then we force his hand," Dawson suggested. "Set up a scenario where he has to act, and we're ready to catch him. A sting operation." Ramirez was quiet for another long moment. "The risks are considerable. If we're wrong, we damage the career of a decorated Marine. If we're right, but he escapes, we've alerted him to our investigation." "Ma'am," Lena said quietly, "the alternative is waiting for Marines to die with compromised weapons." The Major nodded slowly. "Very well, but this investigation remains strictly compartmentalized. No one outside this room knows what we're doing." She fixed Lena with a steady stare. "And Ms. Ortega?" "If this goes sideways, your administrative review becomes a federal investigation. Understood?" "Understood, ma'am." "Good." Ramirez turned to Dawson. "Gunny, I want you to coordinate with Ms. Ortega on operational details. But remember, officially, she's restricted to her repair duties. Anything else happens off the books." "Roger that, ma'am." As they prepared to leave, Ramirez called out one final warning. "People, this stays between us until we have proof. Coates has been a Marine for 15 years. He's got friends, allies, and a reputation to protect. If word of this leaks before we're ready, it won't just be your careers on the line. It'll be the security of this entire base." Walking through the pre-dawn darkness toward the repair bay, Lena felt both hope and terror warring in her chest. They had authorization now, official backing for their investigation. But they also had a target who knew the base's systems as well as anyone, who had access to weapons and personnel, and who had already proven capable of violence. The ghost in the machine had a name now. Soon they'd learn if Thomas Coates was ready to kill to protect his secrets. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. 3 marked weapons, each fitted with microscopic tracking devices and hidden cameras courtesy of base intelligence assets that Ramirez had quietly requisitioned. The rifles would be processed through normal channels, logged into inventory, and assigned to units, creating irresistible targets for someone systematically degrading the base's combat readiness. Lena crouched behind a stack of supply pallets in Storage Bay 12, her heart hammering against her ribs as she watched the grainy feed from her tablet. Across the warehouse, Dawson maintained overwatch from an elevated position near the ventilation system, while Malik monitored the entrance from a concealed position near the main doors. The timestamp on her screen read 0237 hours. They'd been waiting for 3 hours, sustained only by lukewarm coffee and the growing certainty that their trap was about to spring. Movement flickered across the camera feed. A figure in desert utilities moved between the storage racks with practiced stealth, carrying what appeared to be a compact toolkit. Even in the infrared display, Lena recognized the careful, measured movements of someone who belonged in this space. Sergeant Thomas Coates. She keyed her radio twice, the signal for contact. Across the warehouse, she could see Dawson adjusting his position for a clearer view. The hidden cameras would capture everything, but they needed eyewitness testimony to make the charges stick. Coates approached crate ALPHA7, where one of the marked rifles waited in carefully orchestrated vulnerability. He consulted a handheld device, probably a scanner for the tracking chips, then began working on the crate's security seal with professional efficiency. The lid came off with barely a whisper of sound. Coates lifted out the disassembled M16, laying the components on a canvas tarp with surgical precision. From his toolkit, he produced a specialized torque wrench, the same tool that had left distinctive marks on dozens of sabotaged weapons. Lena held her breath as he began his work. In the green glow of the infrared camera, she watched him deliberately over-torque the firing pin housing, creating stress fractures that would cause catastrophic failure under combat conditions. Next came the trigger group, where he loosened critical springs just enough to create timing malfunctions that wouldn't show up in standard inspections. Each action was calculated, professional, deadly. This wasn't random vandalism. It was the methodical work of someone who understood exactly how to kill Marines without leaving obvious evidence. The radio crackled with Dawson's voice, barely a whisper. Phase 2, moving to intercept. But as Coates reassembled the rifle and prepared to reseal the crate, something went wrong. His handheld device flashed red, and he froze like a predator sensing danger. For a heartbeat, he remained motionless, head cocked, as if listening for threats that existed beyond normal perception. Then he was moving, fast and fluid, abandoning his careful stealth for desperate speed. The toolkit disappeared into his cargo pocket as he headed not for the main exit, but toward the emergency access tunnel that connected to the motor pool. He's running, Lena whispered into her radio. Emergency exit, northeast corner. Dawson's response was immediate, converging on tunnel exit. Malik, seal the main doors. Lena abandoned her concealment, sprinting across the warehouse floor toward the emergency access. Behind her, she could hear Malik's boots pounding against concrete as he moved to cut off Coates' primary escape route. The tunnel was narrow, claustrophobic, lined with pipes and electrical conduits that cast strange shadows in the emergency lighting. Lena plunged into the darkness, guided by the sound of running footsteps somewhere ahead. Her breath came in harsh gasps as adrenaline flooded her system, erasing 18 months of civilian comfort and replacing it with the sharp focus of a soldier in contact. She emerged into the motor pool to find chaos. Coates had triggered a small incendiary device, probably a thermite grenade, that was now burning through a stack of spare tires near the fuel depot. Black smoke billowed across the compound as automatic fire suppression systems activated, filling the air with chemical foam and confusion. Through the haze, she could see Coates moving toward the perimeter fence, where a section of razor wire had been pre-cut for exactly this contingency. He'd planned for exposure, prepared multiple escape routes, and was now executing a withdrawal that spoke to years of careful preparation. But he hadn't counted on Malik. The young Marine appeared from behind a Humvee like an avenging spirit, his sidearm drawn and trained on Coates with rock-steady precision. "Stop! Drop your weapons and get on the ground." For a moment, the tableau held predator and prey frozen in the flickering light of burning tires. Then Coates smiled, a cold expression that held no trace of the charming NCO who'd threatened Lena in her repair bay. "You're out of your depth, boy," he said, his voice carrying clearly despite the chaos around them. "You have no idea what you're interfering with." "I know you're a traitor," Malik replied, his young voice steady. "I know you've been selling weapons to insurgents and sabotaging equipment to cover your tracks." "Selling weapons?" Coates laughed, a harsh sound that cut through the night air. "You think this is about money? You think I'm some common criminal?" "Then what?" The explosion cut him off. Coates had triggered another device, this one hidden among the fuel barrels. The blast wave knocked Malik to his knees and sent a column of fire reaching toward the stars like an angry god. In the confusion, Coates lunged forward, tackling the stunned Marine and sending his pistol skittering across the concrete. Lena reached them as they struggled, two figures wrestling in the hellish glow of burning fuel. Without hesitation, she grabbed a tire iron from a nearby toolbox and brought it down hard across Coates' shoulders. The impact sent shockwaves up her arms, but it broke his grip on Malik and sent him sprawling. "You bitch," he snarled, rolling to his feet with predatory grace. "You couldn't leave well enough alone." "Marines were dying," she replied, raising the tire iron defensively. "That's not something I leave alone." "Marines die. That's what they're for." His hand moved to his belt, where Lena now saw he carried a combat knife. "The question is whether you're willing to join them." He came at her fast, the blade cutting silver arcs through the smoky air. Lena gave ground, using the tire iron to block and parry while her mind raced through options. Coates was younger, stronger, and better armed. But he was also angry, which made him predictable. When he lunged for her throat, she stepped inside his guard and drove her knee upward with all her strength. The impact doubled him over, and she followed up with the tire iron across his wrist, sending the knife clattering away into the darkness. Malik was on his feet now, retrieving his sidearm and covering their prisoner with professional competence. "Thomas Coates, you're under arrest for treason, sabotage, and attempted murder of United States military personnel." Coates straightened slowly, his face a mask of pain and rage. "You have no idea what you've done," he said. "No idea what's coming." "What's coming is a court-martial," Dawson's voice cut through the smoke as he emerged from the tunnel entrance, "and about 20 years in Leavenworth." But as they secured Coates with zip-tie restraints, Lena couldn't shake the feeling that his words carried more weight than simple bravado. The sabotage operation had been too sophisticated, too well planned for a single rogue NCO. Someone else was pulling the strings, and they'd just lost their primary asset. The motor pool fire was finally under control as military police arrived to process the scene. In the distance, Lena could hear the base's alert sirens beginning to wail, not for the fire, but for something else entirely. Something that would make the night's revelations seem like a prelude to a much larger storm. The first mortar round landed just outside the perimeter wire at 0347 hours, sending up a geyser of sand and shattered concrete that rattled windows across Camp Valor. Lena was still in the motor pool, giving her statement to military police, when the base's defensive system screamed to life with urgent electronic voices. "Incoming indirect fire, all personnel to hardened positions. This is not a drill." Major Ramirez's voice cut through the chaos on the base-wide communication system, calm and professional despite the circumstances. Alpha and Bravo companies to defensive positions. Charlie Company to the armory for weapons issue. Medical personnel to aid station 1. All non-essential personnel to designated shelters. Lena looked around the motor pool, where Marines were already moving with practiced efficiency toward their assigned positions. The fire from Coates' sabotage still smoldered, but it was forgotten now in the face of external threat. Through the smoke and confusion, she could see muzzle flashes in the distant hills, not random insurgent harassment, but organized suppressive fire designed to pin down the base's defenders. "Ma'am," Malik appeared at her elbow, his face grim. "Sergeant Dawson says you need to get to a shelter." "Where's the armory? How many weapons are available?" "Why do you—" He stopped, understanding dawning in his eyes. "Jesus, the sabotage. How many rifles are compromised?" Before she could answer, another mortar round impacted closer to the base center, the explosion lighting up the night sky and raining debris across the motor pool. In the distance, she could hear the distinctive crack of Alaska 47 fire, punctuated by the heavier rhythm of machine guns. Dawson materialized out of the smoke, his radio crackling with urgent communications. "Contact at the northeast perimeter." Estimated 2 platoons of insurgents with crew-served weapons. He looked directly at Lena. "Ma'am, you need to get to cover." "Gunny, how many of our weapons are operational?" "We're about to find out." His expression was grim. "First and second squads are reporting equipment malfunctions. Rifles that won't fire, trigger groups that jam, firing pins that shear under stress." The scope of the disaster was becoming clear. Coates hadn't just been selling weapons to insurgents. He'd been systematically degrading the base's defensive capability while providing intelligence on their readiness levels. The attack wasn't coincidental. It was perfectly timed to exploit the compromised equipment. "The repair protocols," Lena said suddenly. "In my workshop, I've documented field repairs for every type of malfunction we've found." "That's 15 minutes away," Malik protested, "through a combat zone." "Then we better move fast." She looked at Dawson. "Gunny, I can fix these weapons, but I need tools and space to work. The armory's under indirect fire. Motor pool's still burning. Where exactly?" "Storage Bay 7. It's hardened, has power, and there's enough space to work on multiple weapons simultaneously." Another explosion, closer this time. Through the smoke, they could see tracer rounds beginning to arc over the perimeter wire. The insurgents were closing the range, moving from suppressive fire to direct assault. Dawson's radio crackled with urgent traffic. "All units, weapons malfunction reports coming in from across the perimeter. Estimated 40% of small arms experiencing failures." 40%. Nearly half their defensive capability, compromised by systematic sabotage. Lena felt sick thinking about Marines facing assault with rifles that couldn't fire, trying to defend their brothers with equipment designed to fail. "Storage Bay 7, Dawson decided. "We'll set up a field armory. Malik, get on the radio and tell every squad leader to send their compromised weapons to our location." "Ma'am, you've got whatever tools and personnel you need." They moved through the base like ghosts, using buildings and equipment for cover as mortar rounds continued to fall around them. The insurgent attack was professional, coordinated. Not the random harassment that Camp Valor usually faced, but a deliberate assault designed to overrun their positions. Storage Bay 7 was exactly what Lena needed. A reinforced concrete structure with industrial lighting and enough space to accommodate a dozen workstations. As they set up, Marines began arriving with armloads of malfunctioning weapons, their faces showing the particular frustration of soldiers betrayed by their equipment. "Listen up," Lena called out as more personnel crowded into the bay. "These weapons were deliberately sabotaged. Over-torqued firing pins, loosened trigger springs, damaged bolt carriers, but every malfunction can be field repaired if you know what to look for." She moved to the first rifle, stripping it down with practiced efficiency while explaining each step. "Firing pin housing. See these stress fractures? Replace the pin. Reset the spring tension. Reassemble. Trigger group. These springs have been deliberately loosened. Tighten to specification. Test the action. Verify timing." Around her, Marines began working on their own weapons, following her instructions with the focused intensity of soldiers who understood that their lives depended on getting this right. Malik moved between stations, translating her technical language into terms that 18-year-old Marines could understand and apply. But even as they worked, the sounds of battle grew closer. Through the bay's small windows, they could see muzzle flashes inside the perimeter now. The insurgents had breached the wire, and Camp Valor's depleted defensive force was giving ground. "Ma'am," a young corporal called out, "my rifle's fixed, but we're running low on ammunition." "Ammo depot's on the other side of the base," another Marine added, "and it's probably under fire by now." Lena looked around the storage bay, taking inventory of their resources. They had tools, workspace, and expertise, but they were also cut off from resupply, surrounded by an enemy force that had been fed intelligence about their weaknesses and running out of time. "How many operational rifles do we have now?" she asked. 16, Malik reported. "Another 8 in process." "And personnel?" 23 Marines, plus you and Dawson. Not enough to mount an effective defense, but maybe enough to hold this position until reinforcements could arrive. If reinforcements were coming, if the base's communication systems hadn't been targeted along with everything else. "New plan," she announced. "We're not just repairing weapons. We're creating a fire base. This bay becomes our defensive position, and these rifles become our perimeter." Dawson looked up from the radio he'd been monitoring. "Ma'am, with respect, you're a civilian contractor. You don't give tactical orders. You're right, she agreed. But I'm also the only person here who knows how to fix the weapons we need to survive. So I'm going to keep repairing rifles, and you're going to figure out how to use them. Outside, the sound of gunfire was getting closer. Through the windows, they could see tracers crisscrossing the night sky like deadly fireworks. Camp Valor's defenders were being pushed back, forced to give ground by an enemy that had planned this assault with intimate knowledge of their capabilities. "Contact front!" someone shouted from the bay entrance. The war had found them. The first insurgent appeared in the bay doorway like a nightmare made flesh. Black clothing, assault rifle, face hidden behind a tactical mask that reflected the harsh fluorescent lighting. He raised his weapon toward the Marines clustered around the improvised repair stations, finger tightening on the trigger. Lena's rifle spoke first. The insurgent spun backward into the darkness, his shot going wide and sparking off the concrete ceiling. Around the bay, Marines dove for cover behind equipment pallets and toolboxes, their own weapons coming up with deadly precision. "Contact close!" Dawson's voice cut through the chaos. "Defensive positions. Watch your fields of fire." More figures moved in the darkness beyond the doorway, shadows with weapons, shifting and flowing like smoke given malevolent purpose. Muzzle flashes strobed through the night, and the air filled with the supersonic crack of bullets seeking flesh. Lena rolled behind a heavy workbench, ejecting her spent magazine and slamming home a fresh one with movements that came from muscle memory older than conscious thought. Around her, Marines were engaging targets with controlled bursts, their voices coordinating fire and movement with professional calm, despite the chaos. "RPG!" someone screamed. The rocket-propelled grenades sailed through the bay entrance and detonated against the far wall, sending chunks of concrete and twisted metal flying through the air like deadly confetti. The lights flickered and failed, plunging them into strobing darkness illuminated only by muzzle flashes and the orange glow of fires burning throughout the base. "Emergency lighting," Malik's voice from somewhere in the darkness. "Generators still running." Red battle lights flickered to life, casting everything in hellish crimson that turned familiar faces into demonic masks. The emergency illumination revealed a scene from a war movie. Marines crouched behind improvised cover, weapons trained on multiple approaches, wounded personnel being dragged to safety in the center of the bay. "Ammo check," Dawson called out. The responses weren't encouraging. Most Marines had started the engagement with partial loads, expecting to reach the main armory for resupply. Now they were cut off, surrounded, and running low on the ammunition needed to hold their position. "I've got an idea," Lena said, crawling toward a stack of shipping containers near the back wall. "Malik, help me with this." Together they pried open a container marked "Repair Parts, Small Arms." Inside, nestled in protective foam, were dozens of rifle components, barrels, triggers, bolts, and most importantly, firing mechanisms that could be quickly swapped between weapons. "Modular repairs," she explained, her hands already working to swap out damaged components. "We don't fix the broken rifles. We cannibalize them to keep the working ones operational." It was battlefield expedience, at its most basic level, the kind of improvised solution that kept soldiers alive when proper equipment and procedures were luxuries they couldn't afford. Around them, Marines began stripping components from damaged weapons, creating hybrid rifles that might not pass inspection but would continue fighting. The insurgent assault continued with methodical intensity. They'd obviously studied Camp Valor's layout, knew the approaches and defensive positions, understood exactly how to exploit the compromised weapons situation. But they hadn't counted on finding organized resistance in what should have been a supply depot. "Movement northwest approach," called out Corporal Martinez from a firing position near the loading dock. Multiple contacts, crew-served weapon. The machine gun opened up seconds later, its heavy rounds chewing through the bay's reinforced walls like angry hornets. Marines hugged the floor as concrete dust rained down from above, mixing with smoke and the metallic taste of fear. "Suppressive fire on the machine gun," Dawson ordered, concentrated bursts. "Make them keep their heads down." 6 rifles opened up simultaneously, their muzzle flashes creating a strobe effect that lit up the night beyond the bay. The machine gun fell silent, either destroyed or forced to relocate, giving them precious seconds to reposition and reload. But the respite was temporary. Through the shattered windows, Lena could see more insurgents moving into assault positions. They had superior numbers, better positions, and the advantage of having planned this attack down to the last detail. What they didn't have was the desperate creativity of Marines fighting for their lives. "Malik," she called out, "grab that acetylene torch from the welding station." "Martinez, I need every smoke grenade you can find. Dawson, can you reach base communications?" "Negative. Command post is under heavy fire. We're on our own." "Then we make our own luck." Lena finished swapping bolt carriers between two rifles, checking the action with practiced efficiency. "How many operational weapons do we have now?" 18 rifles, 1 machine gun with about 200 rounds, and whatever grenades we can scrounge." "Against how many insurgents?" "Best guess, 60 to 80. Professional fighters with crew-served weapons and unlimited ammunition." The odds were impossible, the situation hopeless. But as Lena looked around the bay at the Marines who'd somehow ended up under her de facto command, she saw something that gave her hope. These young men, most barely out of their teens, weren't giving up. They were scared, outgunned, and running low on ammunition, but they were still fighting. Still believing that their seamstress could somehow get them out of this alive. "Listen up," she said, her voice carrying clearly despite the ongoing gunfire. "We're not trying to win this fight. We're buying time until reinforcements arrive, or the insurgents decide we're too expensive to dig out." "How do we do that?" Martinez asked. "We make them think we're stronger than we are. Mobility, deception, and the fact that they don't know this building like we do." She pointed toward the maintenance tunnels that connected to other parts of the base. "We're going to become ghosts." Over the next hour, Storage Base 7 became the center of a deadly game of cat and mouse. Small teams of Marines would emerge from maintenance tunnels to hit insurgent positions, then disappear back into the base's infrastructure before return fire could find them. Lena coordinated the movement from the bay's radio, using her knowledge of the base layout to guide teams through approaches that avoided the heaviest enemy concentrations. The acetylene torch became an improvised weapon, creating choke points by welding doors shut and forcing insurgents into killing zones where concentrated rifle fire could do maximum damage. Smoke grenades masked movement and created confusion, making their small force seem larger and more dispersed than reality. But the most effective weapon was the rifles themselves. Every weapon that Lena repaired became a force multiplier, turning desperate Marines into effective combatants who could engage the enemy on equal terms. The insurgents had planned for compromised equipment and demoralized defenders. They hadn't planned for a seamstress who could turn broken weapons into instruments of retribution. As dawn began to break over Camp Valor, the intensity of the fighting slowly diminished. The insurgents were withdrawing, their carefully planned assault having met more resistance than anticipated. In the growing light, Lena could see helicopters approaching from the southeast, reinforcements finally arriving to relieve the battered base. "Contact with base command," Dawson reported, his voice hoarse from smoke and exhaustion. "Colonel Henderson wants a full debrief on defensive actions." "Tell him we held," Lena said simply. "Tell him the weapons worked when they needed to." Around her, Marines were beginning to police up their equipment and tend to wounded comrades. The immediate crisis was over, but the larger questions remained. How had the insurgents known exactly when and where to attack? How had they coordinated their assault with the sabotage operation? And most importantly, who else was involved in the conspiracy that had nearly cost them everything? But those were questions for later. For now, it was enough that they'd survived, that the base still stood, and that Thomas Coates was in custody awaiting the justice he tried so hard to avoid. The seamstress had gone to war, and Camp Valor was still standing. 6 weeks after the battle for Storage Base 7, Lena Ortega stood at the edge of Camp Valor's parade ground, watching Marines practice the weapons assembly drills that had become known throughout the base as Ortega protocols. The morning sun was just beginning its daily assault on the desert, but the temperature was still bearable, a small mercy that everyone had learned to appreciate in this unforgiving landscape. The Marines moved with precision, born of repetition and respect. Under Gunnery Sergeant Dawson's watchful eye, they stripped and reassembled M16s with fluid efficiency, their hands guided by muscle memory that had been forged in the crucible of actual combat. But more than speed, what impressed Lena was the attention to detail, the way each Marine checked tolerances, verified spring tension, and examined components for signs of wear or sabotage. They had learned, finally, That their weapons were more than tools. They were lifelines, and lifelines demanded absolute trust. "Reyes!" Dawson's voice cut through the morning air. "Your firing pin seating is off by 0.02. Fix it." Private First Class Malik Reyes, now wearing corporal's stripes that he'd earned during the defense of the base, nodded and began the delicate adjustment process. His hands moved with confidence that would have been impossible 6 weeks ago, guided by knowledge that had been paid for with blood and validated under fire. "Better," Dawson grudged as Malik completed the adjustment, "but not perfect. Perfect keeps you alive when some bastard's trying to kill you." Lena smiled at the familiar refrain. Dawson had become her most unlikely ally, transforming from skeptical adversary to fierce advocate with the pragmatic flexibility that marked good NCOs throughout military history. He'd been the one to suggest formalizing her maintenance protocols, the one to lobby Major Ramirez for expanded authority, and the one to ensure that every Marine on the base understood exactly what they owed to the quiet woman who'd saved their lives. "Ma'am," Malik approached, his face showing the kind of confidence that came from surviving genuine combat. "Sergeant Dawson wants to know if you have time to review the new maintenance schedules." "Of course." She followed him toward the armory complex, noting the changes that had transformed Camp Valor over the past month and a half. New security protocols, enhanced inventory tracking, and most importantly, a culture of suspicious vigilance that treated equipment tampering as a direct threat to Marine lives. The armory itself had been completely reorganized. Where once Sergeant Coates had maintained informal control over logistics and supply, there was now a system of checks and balances that required multiple signatures for any equipment modification. Serial numbers were tracked through databases that couldn't be altered without leaving digital fingerprints, and every weapon that entered the repair cycle was photographed and documented with forensic precision. "The new protocols are working," Malik reported as they walked. "0 unexplained malfunctions in the past 3 weeks. Equipment readiness is at 97%, highest it's been since I arrived." "And morale?" "Through the roof. Marines know their gear works, they know their leaders listen to them, and they know that anyone who tries to screw with their equipment will answer to you." Lena felt a familiar flutter of discomfort at the hero worship that had grown around her since the battle. She'd never sought recognition, never wanted to be anything more than a competent professional doing necessary work. But she'd learned that leadership wasn't always about what you wanted. Sometimes it was about what others needed you to become. "Corporal," she said quietly, "I fixed some rifles and coordinated a defense. The real heroes were the Marines who stood their ground and fought with whatever they had." "Ma'am, with respect, that's bullshit." Malik's young face was serious, unmarked by the cynicism that military service usually brought. "You could have evacuated to a shelter when the shooting started. You could have let someone else take responsibility for repairs. Instead, you stayed and led, and that's why 23 Marines are still alive." They entered the armory to find controlled chaos. Marines from multiple units waited in organized lines, presenting weapons for inspection and maintenance according to the new schedule that Lena had developed. Each rifle was examined, tested, and documented before being returned to service, creating a paper trail that would make future sabotage nearly impossible. But more important than the paperwork was the attitude. These Marines weren't simply following orders. They were participating in their own protection, taking active responsibility for the equipment that might someday save their lives or the lives of their brothers. It was a cultural shift that had rippled throughout the base, affecting everything from vehicle maintenance to communication security. "Ms. Ortega." A familiar voice drew her attention to the inspection station where Major Ramirez stood reviewing maintenance logs with the focused intensity that had made her one of the youngest commanders in the Corps. "A word, if you have time." They walked to Ramirez's office in comfortable silence, past Marines who nodded respectfully but without the exaggerated deference that Lena found so uncomfortable. The base had settled into a new normal, one where civilian contractors with specialized knowledge were treated as valuable assets rather than necessary nuisances. "Coffee?" Ramirez asked, gesturing toward a pot that looked like it had been brewing since the Mesozoic era. "Please." The major poured 2 cups of liquid that could have doubled as motor oil, then settled behind her desk with the air of someone about to deliver significant news. Her office had changed too, Lena noticed. The operational maps were still there, but they'd been joined by photographs from the base's defense. Images of Marines working together under fire, of improvised solutions that had saved lives, of leaders emerging from unexpected places. "I've received word from Division," Ramirez began. "The investigation into Sergeant Coates' activities has revealed some interesting connections." Lena sat forward, suddenly alert. Connections? It turns out our saboteur wasn't acting alone. Coates was part of a larger network. 5 NCOs across 3 different bases, all selling equipment to insurgent groups while systematically degrading their units' combat readiness. Ramirez consulted a folder marked with security classifications that Lena couldn't read. The profits were significant, but more importantly, they were coordinating their activities to maximize damage to our operational capabilities. A conspiracy. A conspiracy that might have succeeded if one seamstress hadn't noticed patterns that everyone else missed. Ramirez met her eyes directly. "The other bases have implemented versions of your maintenance protocols. 2 more potential attacks have been disrupted because Marines were trained to recognize sabotage." The magnitude of it was staggering. Lena had thought she was solving a local problem, protecting the Marines she worked with every day. Instead, she'd uncovered a systemic threat that could have compromised military operations across an entire theater. "There's more," Ramirez continued. "Division wants to formalize your role. They're offering you a GS-13 position as a technical advisor for equipment security, with authority to inspect and modify maintenance protocols at any base in the region." A promotion. Recognition, the kind of career advancement that civilian contractors usually could only dream about. But also, Lena realized, a return to the bureaucratic world that had failed her brother, failed the Marines at FOB Blackwater, and nearly failed the defenders of Camp Valor. What would that involve? Travel between bases, protocol development, training senior NCOs, liaison with intelligence services, investigating equipment tampering. Ramirez paused. "It's important work. The kind of work that could save a lot of lives. And it would take me away from here." "Eventually, yes." Lena sipped her coffee, using the bitter liquid to buy time for thought. Through the office window, she could see Marines continuing their morning drills, their movements precise and confident. In 6 weeks, they'd gone from a unit struggling with equipment failures to one of the most combat-ready forces in the region. That transformation hadn't happened because of policy directives or bureaucratic initiatives. It had happened because someone had cared enough to fix things properly. "Major, I appreciate the offer, but I think I'll stay here." "May I ask why?" "Because this is where I can do the most good. These Marines know me, trust me, and understand that I'll fight for them when the system fails." Lena set down her coffee cup with deliberate care. "AGS-13 can write policies. A seamstress can fix what's broken." Ramirez studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I thought you might say that, which is why I have a counter-proposal." She opened another folder, this one containing what appeared to be official letterhead and dense paragraphs of military bureaucraties. "The Corps is creating a new position, civilian technical specialist, with authority equivalent to a warrant officer, but without the military command structure. You'd remain at Camp Valor, but with expanded responsibilities and the resources to implement your protocols across the entire region." "Meaning?" "Meaning you get to keep doing what you do best, but with the backing to ensure that every base in our area of operations benefits from your expertise." Ramirez smiled. "Think of it as franchise operations for competent equipment management." The proposal was elegant in its simplicity. Stay where she was needed, do work that mattered, but with the authority and resources to ensure that the lessons learned at Camp Valor could save lives throughout the theater. It was, Lena realized, exactly what she'd hoped for when she'd first decided to return to military service as a civilian. "I accept." "Excellent. There is one condition, however." "Which is?" "You need to stop calling yourself a seamstress. Your official title will be Senior Technical Advisor for Equipment Integrity. It comes with appropriate recognition, appropriate authority, and appropriate respect." Lena laughed, the first genuinely carefree sound she'd made in months. "Major, I've been a seamstress, a mechanic, a medic, and apparently a combat leader. I don't much care what title goes on my badge, as long as the work gets done." "Fair enough. But the Marines care. They need to know that the woman who saved their lives is valued by the institution they serve." An hour later, Lena found herself back on the parade ground, watching Dawson put a fresh group of Marines through weapons assembly drills. But now she saw it differently. not just as training for the soldiers at Camp Valor, but as the foundation for a program that would spread throughout the region, protecting Marines she'd never meet at bases she'd never visit. "Ma'am?" Malik appeared at her elbow, now wearing the confident bearing of an NCO who'd earned his stripes in combat. "Sergeant Dawson wants to know if you're available for the weapons testing this afternoon." "Of course. What's being tested?" "New rifles, fresh from the factory. The sergeant wants to make sure they meet Ortega protocol standards before we issue them to the squads." Ortega protocol. Somewhere in the bureaucratic machinery of the Marine Corps, her improvised maintenance procedures had been codified, standardized, and given official recognition. It was simultaneously humbling and terrifying, the knowledge that her work would now affect thousands of Marines she'd never meet. "Tell the sergeant I'll be there." "And Malik?" "Yes, ma'am?" "Make sure the new Marines understand that these protocols aren't magic. They're just careful attention to detail, combined with the understanding that other people's lives depend on getting things right." "Roger that, ma'am." As the afternoon heat began its assault on Camp Valor, Lena made her way back to her workshop, now expanded and officially designated as the Equipment Integrity Center. The space had grown to accommodate multiple repair stations, advanced diagnostic equipment, and a small classroom where Marines learned to identify and prevent equipment tampering. But at its heart, it was still the same quiet place where broken things came to be made whole again. The same rolls of fabric lined the shelves. The same sewing machine sat in its place of honor, and the same sense of purposeful calm pervaded the air. She had work to do, rifles to inspect, protocols to refine, and Marines to train. But for the first time since her brother's death, Lena felt that her work was making a difference in ways that mattered. She was still a seamstress, still someone who fixed things that were broken. But now she was also something more, a guardian of the tools that kept Marines alive, a teacher who passed on hard-won knowledge, and a leader who'd proven that competence and courage could emerge from the most unexpected places. The afternoon sun slanted through the workshop windows, casting golden rectangles across her workbench where a half-finished uniform alteration waited for completion. It was routine work, the kind of invisible maintenance that kept a military base functioning. But as Lena picked up her needle and thread, she understood that there was nothing routine about ensuring that Marines had equipment they could trust. Every stitch was a small act of care. Every repair was a hedge against chaos. And every day that passed without equipment, failure was a victory earned through vigilance, competence, and the understanding that in a world full of people trying to break things, someone had to take responsibility for fixing them. Outside her window, Marines moved through their daily routines with the confidence that came from knowing their equipment would work when it mattered. Their weapons had been inspected, their gear had been tested, and their trust had been earned through demonstrated competence rather than assigned authority. It was, Lena thought as she settled into the familiar rhythm of needle and thread, exactly the kind of victory that her brother would have understood. Not the dramatic triumph that made headlines, but the quiet success that sent soldiers home alive to families who would never know how close they'd come to loss. The seamstress was still sewing, still fixing what was broken, still making sure that the small details were perfect so that the big picture could hold together. But now she was doing it with the knowledge that her work mattered, that her voice would be heard, and that the Marines under her care would never again have to face their enemies with equipment designed to fail. In the end, that was all she'd ever wanted, the chance to do good work in service of people who deserved better than a system that saw them as expendable. She'd found that chance in an unlikely place, earned it through unexpected trials, and proven it in the crucible of combat. Now it was time to get back to work. As the sun set over Camp Valor, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson, Lena Ortega bent over her sewing machine and began another day's work of keeping Marines alive through the simple act of caring enough to do things right. The thread ran true through her fingers, each stitch a small promise that someone, somewhere, was paying attention to the details that made the difference between life and death. It was honest work. It was necessary work. And it was, finally, properly recognized as the essential service it had always been. The seamstress had found her place in the war, and the war was better for it. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.